Good morning, friends. Welcome to another art journaling class here on Sunday for October. I'm starting today with a piece of watercolor paper from Canson. Probably nothing new for you if you've been tuning into my videos. I really like to start on watercolor paper because it's super sturdy and I can throw a bunch of things at it and it almost always ends up flat again when my product is dry. So I'm starting with Canson watercolor paper. I have a Daler Rowney Simply Simmons wash brush, and I'm spreading out some Liquitex gesso. The professional bottle, it has like a black and blue label. And I really enjoy this gesso for a base coat because it's super smooth and perfect and just ends up really nice and smooth, and I can continue to work on it. So I don't really use it as a texture element, just a primer. Make sure it's completely dry. And then I've got a bit of water. I sprayed a bit of water over my page and then kind of smeared it around. And I'm using just a tiny bit of this gray colored acrylic. And I'll make sure that the appropriate name and link is down below. But I'm using a very small amount because I want my background to be sort of wishy-washy and with different values and different brush strokes and things like that. So one of the ways to make that happen is by adding a lot of water to my acrylic paint and then kind of, yeah, just trying different brush strokes and swirling it around and stroking it around and not overworking it. So the more you work it, the more even it's going to end up. And so you just kind of have to keep an eye on it and kind of go with your gut feeling and say, oh, it has enough washiness to it. Oh, it doesn't have enough washiness to it. That kind of thing. So this is more, now this is more of a textural thing, but it's fake texture, not real texture like a modeling paste or a coarse like sand paste would be or anything like that. So the page is still fairly flat, and especially because I watered down the acrylic with just straight water, it's just fake texture. So it's very flat, and all of that kind of marbly, warbly goodness is coming from the fact that I just added water to my acrylic. And now I've got out this, if you were watching kind of my last video or maybe the one before it, I got some new Amsterdam acrylics, and I've seen a lot of people using these, and I've used all kinds of acrylics, Golden, Liquitex, Ranger, I mean, just so many different acrylics. And, but everyone really liked these, or it seems like everyone likes them, and they're really affordable. So last time Blick had a pretty good sale, I picked up a few. By a few, I mean like 20 because you can never go small, right? And I've been kind of experimenting now with the colors and having fun with them. And I do really like this paint. So it's really good because it's an affordable paint that I can pick up, whenever I need it. Offline, my local Blick doesn't carry it in store, but I can pick them up offline and get a really good selection for a really good price. And then they're here within a few days. So, all of that is just to say that I've been experimenting with these new paints, and that's why it's been very like acrylic heavy lately. But it's no big deal because I love acrylics because they're permanent when dry. And so they're so different from working in other mediums. I can play with them and work with them and do whatever I want, layer after layer after layer, and then continue to build on top of them after that. So, this is an orange from, it might be Azo orange. I'll have to double check that too. So don't quote me. Just read the supply list below. And I started by applying it with a paintbrush, fairly heavy in some areas, and then I'm using water to thin it out and create sort of a gradient effect, but it's kind of more just another layer of washy goodness. So it's similar to the background, and I'm kind of just playing with it and feathering it out and then layering it up heavier in some areas. And I'm playing with the values that the color has. So I'm not adding white and black for that though. In this instance, my darkest value is the paint all by itself with no water or no dilution. And then as I dilute it with the water, the thinner and thinner and thinner it gets, that's my lightest value. And you can play with values too by adding white and making the orange lighter and lighter and lighter, or by adding black and making the orange darker and darker and darker. But in this case, the values just come from the amount of water that the paint has in it. And then two, one of the things I should mention is composition. So you can see like I'm not really covering the whole page in orange. Um, and I've talked about this a lot too. Like I really like a lot of neutrals with some splashes of color and some pops of color in there. So that's what I'm aiming for here. And I use the orange on the top left corner and down the left side a little bit. Then there's a bit on the right side, and then a big, nice, hefty splash coming from the bottom right. And it's the same thing, adding some and taking some away, adding some and taking some away. I call it the song and dance, and I just have a baby wipe so that when the paint gets maybe too far away from the origination area, then I can sop it up with the baby wipe and kind of keep it from taking over all the gray, because I don't want to lose the gray. And another thing about adding water to the acrylic and layering it on top of the gray is that I still can see that washy textural effect that I got from that first background layer. It comes through where that orange gets more transparent with the water that's been added to it. Very cool. Very, very cool. I'm not going to lie. I love it, and I love just playing with acrylics and you saw earlier, like I got out my palette knife and I did a tiny bit of scraping with my palette knife just to add some more darkness back to it. Oh, here, so I was showing the Amsterdam orange, and then I got out this Blick orange, and I thought it would be a good complementary color. But as I put it down, it ended up being way too corally. Like it has this really interesting pink effect to it, which is fantastic. And I definitely will still use this on something else, but I did not want it mixed with this more fiery orange that I had going on here. So I don't know if that orange was lending itself to be a bit more red based, where this orange that I'm using now is a bit more yellow based. But I didn't like how the two were playing together on this page necessarily. So it's no biggie because it was still wet. I could just wipe it off and put some more water down and pick up the residue that was left over. So after that little kind of funny fiasco, I went back to the original orange. Ooh, and the reason I picked up that Blick orange was because I was looking for something a little more intense and a little just to add a little more contrast to the page. And I ended up going back to the original orange and just darkening up and kind of widening that area. So that worked as well. I just knew I needed a little more punch. I needed my page to punch me in the face. And here I'm going to do this a little bit of scraping again. I really love scraping paint. The whole painting with your palette knife and scraping with paint is such a complete different feel than working with a brush or your fingers. And I feel like starting with a palette knife, it's so scrapey and textural and harsh. And then a paintbrush is so soft and subtle. And then I think in between, your might be your fingers if you paint with your hands, or maybe reverse the paintbrush and the fingers. I'm not sure. I'll work on that and get back to you. But here, yeah, you can see when I scrape the paint, because it's with a palette knife, I can keep it fairly thick and darken up some of those origination points for the orange again. And I scraped a couple lines on the right hand side, one for balance and two just to pull the orange in off of the background. Like it doesn't have to be connected to the edge of the page. So I wanted a little bit of free floating goodness happening there with that orange. So easy to do, kind of mimicking that right side there. And you will notice I turn my page fairly often, and right now I'm turning my page in this video so that I can fit both the jelly plate. I just got out my 8x10 jelly plate. I have a brayer, and I have some Dina Wakley Ranger ink heavy body paints. Then I just set some bubble wrap down and I've spread out my paint. I'm not actually jelly printing, but this is such a perfect way to get some cool texture. I spread out my paint and then I dipped my bubble wrap into the paint. And so now it's kind of like a stamp pad, but it's not as much work for me. I think it's super easy and simple. And now real quick, I'm going to pull the paint that's still wet from the jelly print, and then I do actually have two miniature jelly prints here. So set those to the side, and I can use those in something else. And they're certainly cool too. play it away. Good to go. Get my art journal page back out. And so now I have these really cool teal dots all over the page, and I love it. And it's such a great contrast to the orange. And because I used the orange, and then let it dry and then use the teal, they didn't mix to make this gross brown color. They just perfect contrast or complementary colors. I've got out a piece of white tissue paper, and I've got one of my favorite designs I did for Viva Las Vegas stamps, the star collage, and some Ranger ink. And then just make sure you have some paper down when you stamp on tissue paper, because the ink will go through the tissue paper. So what I'm doing here is, now that I've got these different layers happening on my page, if I were to stamp directly onto my page, I wouldn't get a clear stamp. But if I stamp onto tissue paper and then I rip the edges like this, there's kind of like, when you rip paper, it has that scraggly edge, those fibery edges to it. They're great on white tissue paper because you can use some matte medium or gel medium, watered down, or fluid matte medium would even be better, to put the star down. And if those edges are scraggly enough and you've ripped them instead of cut them, then they're going to meld into the background. They're just going to blend in, and you'll have a perfect stamped image. So basically we're going to do a little bit of collaging now, but just a little bit with our star. So I've added some matte medium, and it was a little bit too thick, so then I added some water to it as well. I've covered the background, and now I'm going to put that tissue paper collage star down. I'm collaging it in, and you can see those edges. It's blending right into the page because they were ripped. Now, if you cut them and you have a harsh line there, then they're not going to blend in as well. But by ripping them, the fibers sort of just melt into the background, and there's no starting point or stopping point for where that tissue has been laid on the background. It's so cool. You can do this with so many different things. You could, using this technique, you could stamp on 3D objects. You could create really great scenes, just all kinds of different things. So I really wanted to show that, and it's very cool. And now that star is just up there hanging out. Perfect. It's like I stamped it in the beginning and it had a resist or something. It's very cool. I love doing this when I've been kind of stamping and having fun. I like to go around the edge of the stamp with a Stabilo. It's a Stabilo Marks All in black, and then just use a little water and activate that Stabilo in sort of a gradient effect, and it creates a cool shadow around my stamped image. And then the main part of the image, that sort of that inside part of the star, is going to remain the cool, like ungrungy acrylic from the layer below, and it just kind of pops and stands out. I really like it. Then I had a little bit of Stabilo left on my brush, so I dipped it back in the water and kind of splattered those areas around. And I know that the Stabilo is going to lighten up a little bit as it dries. Not a ton. It is a very, very heavy black, and I really like it. But by adding more water to the Stabilo that was in my brush and then splattering those around, I was able to create kind of cool little gray splatters around. So it's really great. Then I have these shell buttons that I picked up a few weeks ago. I really love shell buttons, both white and sort of like that more like gray natural version. I'm using the same matte medium that I used before, but now I'm just using it straight from the container. I'm not watering it down, and it's gonna kind of dry. It's basically, I'm using it as an adhesive. So it's gonna pop up a little bit through the holes in the buttons, but I don't mind, because as it pops up through the holes in the buttons and meets on the top, then it creates kind of a little envelope, which is a lot better to keep the button glued down to the paper. So yeah, keep that in mind. Don't always wipe away the extra glue that's on top of things, especially if you have something nice like matte medium that's going to dry clear and matte anyways. It's just going to blend right in with the buttons. I kind of was deciding right there, I was going to scribble around my buttons with the Stabilo, but then I decided to get out the number 2 pencil and mimic that kind of cool gray splatter that I had gotten from the Stabilo earlier. So I'm just using my pencil now to do some mark making, and I've been having a lot of fun with this. I should probably step away from it a little bit. I hope the videos aren't getting too repetitive by using a number 2 pencil, but I really enjoy it. It's such a cool way to add some scribbles and things like that. And I also have realized and found out and kind of picked up tips from other people. If you find that your mark making with a pencil is getting too deliberate, and you're like, oh, all my circles are the same or all my lines are the same. Hold your pencil further back. And so if you hold it towards the eraser, then you don't have as much control and it has a lot more movement to it and it gets sort of wibbly wobbly and it's very, very cool. That was it, I think, for the pencil. So I got back out the Stabilo and I thought it would be a great idea to contrast the edges of the page where the orange hadn't made it to. So just using the Stabilo, I did a tiny bit of scribbling and then I activated it with water and it did turn out very cool. It's just a bit more grungy and I've said that a lot lately too, but I'm really enjoying the aspect of the grunge and the layers and the just all the different techniques that you can put into your page without it being overwhelming. And I know that my pages may not be like they don't have magazine clippings on them and they don't always have a saying or a meaning or something specific to you maybe, but to me they're kind of my art journaling pages are a way to try out new techniques and to layer and to practice my techniques and to hone my skills. So I am really glad that you've been joining me, especially because I know that they're not my art journal pages aren't aiming towards something specific except for honing skills. So, thank you so much for being here continually. I'm glad you're here. Let me know what you think of the video. Don't forget to subscribe. You can just click this button here. You can check out my other art journaling videos or what I've been doing for Donna Downey. You can also find me on Facebook and Society 6, and I actually have a Facebook group specifically dedicated to, well, me, to products I design and to lessons I've been teaching and interesting things that I learned from other teachers and other artists and other crafters and things like that. So I'll put a link below for that too. And I look forward to seeing you. Thanks. Bye.